Okay, so I need you to imagine something with me for a second. Picture yourself in 2019. You've got a $100 bill in your pocket. A crisp, beautiful, feels like real money $100 bill. You're at the grocery store. You feel good. You feel capable. You feel like a functional adult who has their life together, and honestly, that's a rare feeling, so you're savoring it. You grab your eggs. You grab your bread. You grab your milk. You grab a few extras because, hey, you're doing great. You've got $100. You're basically wealthy. Now fast forward to today. You walk into that same grocery store. You've still got that $100 bill. You saved it. Maybe you forgot it in an old jacket pocket, whatever. And here's the thing. That $100, it is not the same $100. The number on it says 100. Benjamin Franklin's face still looks mildly disappointed in you as always. But what that bill can actually buy you, what it can do for you in the real, physical, this is what I'm eating for dinner world. It's less. Substantially, embarrassingly, cosmically less. And if you want to get technical about it, and I do because I've spent way too much time going down this rabbit hole, and I need someone else to feel this pain with me, that $100 from 2019 has about the purchasing power of roughly $83 to $85 today, depending on which category of stuff you're buying. Which is not a typo. Which is not me being dramatic for the YouTube algorithm, although I appreciate you assuming I would do that. That is just the math. The math of what inflation has done to the US dollar. The math of what 5 years of price increases, money printing, stimulus checks, supply chain disasters, corporate profit padding, and a Federal Reserve playing financial Jenga with interest rates has done to your purchasing power. And today, because we're friends, and because friends don't let friends get financially wrecked without at least an explanation, we're going to talk about all of it. We're going to talk about why your dollar is worth less, how it got this way, who it's hurting the most, who is, and I say this with genuine simmering outrage, actually benefiting from it. We're going to talk about what the government is doing about it, what the Fed is doing about it, and whether any of it is actually working. And we're going to talk about what this means for your savings, your retirement, your monthly budget, and that vague, creeping sense you get every time you check your bank account that something is wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on it. That feeling has a name. It's called inflation, and it's been picking your pocket for years. Buckle up. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and I promise I'll make it as painless as possible, which is a lie, but a well-intentioned one. Let's start at the beginning, because I think a lot of us have a vague understanding of inflation, but not a, I can explain this to my confused uncle at Thanksgiving level of understanding. And honestly, that's a skill gap we're closing today. Inflation, at its most basic, is when the purchasing power of money goes down. When a dollar buys less than it used to. When the pile of cash you're sitting on, your savings account, your emergency fund, that envelope of cash your grandmother gave you for graduation, is slowly, silently, legally being pickpocketed by the economic system around you. And the key word there is slowly. Because that's what makes it so sneaky. It's not like someone walks up to you and takes $20 out of your wallet. It's more like you walk up to your wallet a year from now, and the $20 is still there, but somehow it only does the job of $17. You didn't lose the money. The money just became less. That is a genuinely insane concept when you think about it for more than 15 seconds, by the way. You can do everything right. Save your money, be responsible, not spend it on whatever dumb thing you were going to spend it on, and inflation will still come for you. Silently, patiently, without apology. So how bad has it actually gotten? Since 1913, which is when the Federal Reserve was created, a coincidence I'll let you sit with, the US dollar has lost approximately 96.8% of its purchasing power. The dollar you hold today buys about 3 cents worth of what a dollar bought in 1913. 3 cents. To be precise about it, what cost $1 in 1913 costs roughly $31.70 today. Now you might be saying, okay, but that's over 100 years. That's not really relevant to my current Tuesday. Fair. Let's zoom in. From just 2020 to today, a period of about 5 years, which is not a century, which is the amount of time it takes to decide if you like a TV show, the dollar has lost around 20 to 25% of its purchasing power, depending on what you're buying. Food and energy and housing took the express elevator. Electronics and some goods have actually gotten cheaper, but nobody's budgeting around, well, at least my flat-screen TV is affordable. You can't eat a flat-screen TV. And if you could, that would also be expensive now, probably. 2022, 9.1% inflation, highest in 40 years. The peak of this particular inflation circus came in June of 2022, when year-over-year inflation hit 9.1%. That's the highest it's been since 1981, which means we went from a period in the early 2020s where inflation was hovering around a sleepy, normal, practically forgettable 2%, to suddenly having the worst inflation in 4 decades, in the span of basically 18 months. That is not a gradual drift. That is an economic faceplant. Now by 2024 things had cooled down. Inflation came in at around 2.9% annually, which sounds dramatically better than 9.1%. And it is, in the same way that spraining your ankle is dramatically better than breaking your leg. It's still a bad time, but sure, we can call it progress. The problem, and there are several problems, we're going to get to all of them, is that lower inflation doesn't mean prices went down. It means prices went up more slowly. The prices that shot up to the moon in 2021 and 2022 are still up there. They didn't come back down to earth, they just stopped rising quite as fast. The mountain is still the mountain. It's just not getting taller as aggressively. So when economists and government officials say inflation is under control, what they mean is the emergency is technically over. What they do not mean is your groceries are cheap again, or rent went back to where it was, or your savings recovered the purchasing power they lost. Those things did not happen. Those things are living in a dimension we do not have access to. And that right there is the trap that a lot of Americans have fallen into. The news says inflation is down. The official numbers look better. But you go to the grocery store and you still feel like you're getting robbed in slow motion. And you are not imagining that. You are correct. The robbery just moved to a different gear. Grocery store. Person looking at price tags. Slight double take. This is what economists call the inflation hangover. The headache is lasting way longer than the party. And the party, for the record, was a bunch of stimulus checks and pandemic money printing that we're still paying for. More on that in a minute. Okay, so 2020. You remember 2020. We all remember 2020. The world's most unwelcome plot twist. Pandemic hits, economy locks down, people stop spending money, businesses close, and suddenly the government has to figure out how to keep the entire economic system from collapsing like a very large Jenga tower that someone sneezed on. So what did they do? They did what governments do when they need to fix something expensive. They spent money. A lot of money. An almost cosmically large amount of money. The CARES Act, the PPP loans, the stimulus checks, multiple rounds of them, enhanced unemployment benefits, Federal Reserve bond buying programs. You remember getting that direct deposit? That felt good, right? That was real money, genuinely helpful, and I am not in any way making fun of the fact that people needed it. A lot of people needed it desperately, and it was the right call at a deeply wrong moment. But here's the thing about creating money to solve problems. It has consequences. The Federal Reserve expanded what's called the M2 money supply, basically all the money sloshing around in the economy, by 19% in 2020, and then another 16% in 2021. To put those numbers in context, the average annual M2 growth rate in the decade before that was about 7.7%. So we doubled it, then almost doubled it again, in 2 years. That is not a subtle adjustment. That is turning the money faucet to full blast while also removing the drain and adding a second faucet. And here's the basic economic reality that nobody wants to hear, because it sounds like something your boring uncle would say. When you have more money chasing the same amount of goods and services, prices go up. That's it. That's inflation in a sentence. Too many dollars, not enough stuff. Now, was the money printing the only cause? No, absolutely not. We also had supply chains, the global system of how stuff gets from where it's made to where you buy it, completely fall apart. Factories shut down, ships were stuck in ports, computer chips were back-ordered. You couldn't buy a new car. You couldn't get furniture for 6 to 8 months. The supply of stuff cratered right at the moment that demand, fueled by all those stimulus dollars, exploded. And then the war in Ukraine happened in 2022, which sent energy prices and food commodity prices through the roof, because Russia and Ukraine together supply a significant chunk of the world's wheat and energy. So that was another log on the inflation fire, at a moment when the fire was already deeply, dramatically out of control. So you had too much money created, supply chains destroyed, an energy shock, and a food commodity crisis. All at the same time. The math isn't mathing in a fun way. It's mathing in a where is my purchasing power and why is it gone way. And look, people smarter than me, probably, have debated which of these factors was the real cause of inflation. The economists who are into monetary policy will point at the M2 charts and say, this is a money supply problem. The economists who study supply chains will point at the port backlogs. The politically motivated economists will pick whichever cause is most convenient for whatever argument they're making. And that's fine. That's their thing. The answer is, it was all of it. It was the perfect storm. It was giving season finale energy at the worst possible time. And the result was 9.1% annual inflation in June 2022, 40-year high. Things were so bad that a family that had been spending, say, $5,000 a month on their regular expenses in 2020 was looking at spending $6,000 or more for the exact same lifestyle by mid-2022. Same house, same food, same commute. $600 extra a month just gone, just surrendered to the inflation machine. And good luck finding an extra $600 a month because wages weren't exactly keeping pace. Speaking of which, this is the part that I think is genuinely, deeply underappreciated in conversations about inflation. Because there's this idea that floats around that goes, well, wages went up too, so it balances out. And I understand why people believe that, I truly do. It sounds like it should be true. It has the shape of a fact. But it is mostly not a fact. Here's what actually happened to wages during this inflation period. Yes, nominal wages went up. The number on your paycheck got bigger for a lot of people. Low-wage workers in particular saw some of the largest nominal wage gains they'd seen in years, which, genuinely good. No complaints there. Real average weekly earnings fell nearly 4% since 2021. So yes, your check might say a bigger number. But in terms of what that number actually does for you at the grocery store, at the gas station, at the landlord's door, it's doing less than it was 3 years ago. The Ludwig Institute, which tracks something called the True Living Cost Index, which measures what it actually costs to maintain a minimal quality of life in America, rather than the government's somewhat cheerful CPI estimates, found that the real cost of a basic American life rose 4.4% in 2024. Meanwhile, median weekly earnings for full-time workers grew 3.9%. So you got a raise. The cost of living got a bigger raise. And here's the number that will make you want to stare at the ceiling for a few minutes. According to the Ludwig Institute, the minimal quality of life, not a comfortable life, not a vacation-having, retirement-saving, anything fun happening life, but a minimal, functional, keeping the lights on life, for a family of 4 in America now exceeds $121,000 a year. $121,000. The median household income in America is somewhere around $78,000. I'll give you a second with that gap. So if you're sitting there wondering why it feels impossible, why you feel like you're doing everything right and still falling behind, why your parents seem to manage on 1 income and you can't manage on 2, why the math of modern American life just doesn't add up no matter how many times you run the numbers, You are not bad at money. You are not lazy. You are not making bad choices. You are living in a system where the cost of a basic life has outrun what that system actually pays most people to do their jobs. And inflation is a central player in that story. Person at a budget spreadsheet looking stressed, a calculator, a bill. Now let's talk about savings, because this is where it gets particularly grim. And I say that as someone who thought it was already pretty grim. Here's a fun experiment you can do at home. Actually, don't do this, it'll ruin your week. But hypothetically, go look at your savings account balance from, say, January 2020. Now look at what it is today. If you've been consistently saving and adding to it, the number is probably bigger. That feels good, right? Growth, progress, financial responsibility paying off. Now adjust that number for inflation. Take whatever you had in January 2020 and ask yourself, what would that number need to be today to have the same purchasing power as it did back then? If you had $10,000 in January 2020, you'd need roughly $12,200 to $12,500 today just to break even, just to have the same purchasing power you had 5 years ago. Did your savings account grow by 20 to 25%? Because it needed to, just to stay in place. And here's the really infuriating part. For most of the inflation crisis, savings account interest rates were essentially zero. Banks were paying you, and I'm using the term paying generously, somewhere between 0.01 and maybe 0.5% annually on your savings, which means inflation was taking 2, 3, 7, 9% of your purchasing power, and your bank was handing you a fraction of a percent back. The math on that is so bad. If you had $50,000 in a standard savings account in 2021, $50,000 you worked for, saved responsibly, didn't blow on anything foolish. Inflation was removing something like $3,500 of purchasing power from that account that year. Your bank was giving you maybe $50 back in interest. Net result? You ended the year $50,000 richer on paper, and roughly $3,450 poorer in reality. And nobody sent you a notice about it. Nobody called you. There was no pop-up. The money was still there. It just got quietly, consistently less valuable while you were busy being alive. Now, and I want to be honest here because I'm not trying to do the doom is everywhere, despair is mandatory thing. The high-yield savings account situation improved significantly when the Fed started raising interest rates. By 2023 and into 2024, you could actually find savings accounts paying 4 to 5%, which was genuinely the best yield on cash in over a decade. So if you were paying attention and moved your money to a high-yield account, you were at least in the ballpark of keeping up with inflation. But most Americans weren't in high-yield savings accounts. Most Americans had their money sitting in traditional big bank accounts paying next to nothing. Because that's what most people do. Because navigating the financial system is not a skill set that's taught in most schools. And because most people are busy. And because the default option at most banks for your first savings account is not a high-yield product. So the people most equipped to navigate financial complexity, people with more money, more financial education, more time, more existing relationships with financial institutions, benefited from the high-yield era. And the people who needed the help most were still getting 0.5%, while inflation ate their lunch. This is a pattern, by the way. We'll come back to it. Meanwhile, on the emergency savings front, only 55% of Americans had enough saved to cover 3 months of expenses in 2024, down from the peak in 2021, when stimulus money had temporarily padded a lot of accounts. And 37% of retirees, people who are not going to go get a second job to rebuild their cushion, people whose savings are what they have, reported having essentially zero savings. 25% of employed adults cut their retirement contributions in 2022 because inflation had eaten through their discretionary income and something had to give. And what gave was the future. Because that's how financial stress works. You sacrifice the long game to survive the short game. You stop putting money into the retirement account so you can put it toward this month's grocery bill, which costs more than it did last month, which costs more than it did the month before. The future takes the hit because the present demands it. That is an absolutely brutal position to be in, and it's one that millions of Americans found themselves in during this inflation cycle. Not because of bad decisions, but because the numbers stopped adding up. Okay, this section is the one I really needed to talk about, because when I went down this rabbit hole, my blood pressure had some thoughts. You are familiar with inflation. You've noticed prices going up. You're braced for it. You've accepted it maybe in a grim, we're all in this together way. Fine. But there's another game being played simultaneously, and it's called shrinkflation. And it's the economic equivalent of getting a haircut where they charge you the same price, but take an extra inch off without mentioning it. Shrinkflation is when a company doesn't raise the price of their product, because they know you'll notice that because price tags are visible, but instead quietly reduces the amount of product you're getting. Same package, same shelf position, same brand you've been buying for years. Less stuff inside. Coca-Cola did this. Their 64-ounce bottles quietly became 59-ounce bottles. That's 7% less soda for the same price, which is a 7% price increase in disguise, delivered with the confidence of a company that's betting you won't notice. You probably didn't notice. That's the whole point. Toilet paper rolls are shorter. Bags of chips have more air in them than ever before, to the point where the air-to-chip ratio has become a legitimate consumer issue. Ice cream containers that used to be half a gallon are now 48 ounces. Cookie packages have fewer cookies. Cereal boxes are the same height but thinner. Orange juice containers are smaller. A Harvard study confirmed that people notice price increases significantly more than quantity decreases. So if you want to quietly make your product more expensive without triggering consumer backlash, you don't raise the price, you just give people less. And apparently this works, because it has been deployed at industrial scale across basically every consumer goods category you can name. And then there's greedflation, which is the far spicier cousin of shrinkflation, and which has been the subject of some genuinely fascinating economic research that I think deserves more airtime than it gets. Here's the thing. Inflation happens for the structural reasons we've already discussed. Too much money chasing too few goods, supply chain chaos, energy shocks, etc. That's real. That's a real set of causes. But here's what the data also shows. From July 2020 to July 2022, overall consumer prices went up 14%. During that same period, corporate profits surged 74%, 5 times faster than inflation. The Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City did research attributing 41% of the 2020 to 2022 inflation specifically to higher corporate profits. Let that number breathe. 41%. By 2024, extending the period from July 2020 to July 2024, consumer prices had gone up 21%. Corporate profits had gone up 90%, 4.5 times faster. Now, to be fair, and I'm forcing myself to be fair here because the alternative is just screaming, corporations are not charities. They have shareholders. They have obligations. When costs go up, they pass them on. That's capitalism, working as designed. But what the data shows is that many companies use the cover of the "everything is expensive right now" era to raise their prices by more than their costs actually increased. They use the universal "everything costs more" vibe as a justification to quietly expand their profit margins. When the input costs eventually came back down, when supply chains started recovering, when commodity prices eased, did they lower their prices back? Did they pass those savings along to consumers? Reader, they did not. PepsiCo kept its margins. Procter & Gamble kept its margins. The transitory cost increases were in many cases not transitory on the price tag. They just became the new price, permanently. And the profit margin improvement became the new normal. This is why, even as inflation cooled, the persistent feeling of being financially squeezed didn't go away. Because it wasn't supposed to go away. The new price levels were the point. And in 2025, Before we even get to whatever's coming next, we've got the added joy of tariffs. The 2025 tariff regime pushed tariff-sensitive goods, electronics, appliances, clothing, certain foods, up by approximately 5.4% at the retail level. Yale's Budget Lab found that about 61 to 80% of those tariff costs were passed through to consumers within months. So that's another layer on top of everything we've already been discussing. It's like the adding insult to injury machine got an upgrade. So at some point, specifically March 2022, the Federal Reserve looked at the inflation numbers, said some version of, well, this is bad, and started raising interest rates. Aggressively. Faster than they'd raised them in decades. In total, the Fed raised its benchmark interest rate by 5 full percentage points between March 2022 and mid-2023. From basically 0 to 5.25 to 5.5%. The fastest rate hiking cycle in modern history. The theory, and the theory is correct in isolation, is that raising interest rates makes borrowing more expensive. More expensive borrowing means people borrow less, spend less, businesses invest less, economic activity slows down, demand falls, and prices, theoretically eventually, stop going up as fast. It worked, sort of. Inflation did come down, from 9.1% in mid-2022 to around 2.9% by 2024. So we can check that box. But here's the part nobody puts in the Victory Lap press release. Fighting inflation with higher interest rates is not a surgery. It's a chemotherapy. It targets the disease, yes, but it also hits a lot of healthy stuff on the way. Mortgages. Let's talk about mortgages. In January 2022, the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate was 3.22%. That's a historically low, practically incredible rate that people who bought houses in that era will be bragging about to their grandchildren. By October 2023, that same mortgage had climbed to 7.79%, the highest it had been in over 20 years. What does that actually mean for a real human trying to buy a real house? On a $400,000 loan, which is not a luxury home, that's a starter home in most metros, your monthly principal and interest payment went from approximately $1,612 a month at the 2021 rate to $2,877 a month at the 2023 peak. That is 78% more per month for the exact same loan amount, for the exact same house. And if we're talking about the median home price at the time, which was around $423,000, monthly payments from 2021 to the 2023 peak essentially more than doubled. A 113% increase in what you had to pay per month to own the same house. So inflation destroyed your purchasing power on groceries and gas. Then the solution to inflation, higher interest rates, destroyed your purchasing power on buying a home. It's a 2-for-1 deal that nobody asked for. And if you already owned a home with a low fixed-rate mortgage, you were actually kind of okay on the housing front. Your payment was locked in, your asset appreciated. But if you were a renter trying to become a homeowner during this period, or a first-time buyer, or someone who needed to move for work or family reasons, and therefore had to transact in this market, you got hit by inflation, and you got hit by the cure for inflation simultaneously, which is not how medicine is supposed to work, conceptually, but here we are. And then there's credit cards. Credit card interest rates are variable and tied to the prime rate, which moves with the Fed. By 2024, the average credit card APR had climbed to 23.37%, which is not a mistake. 23.37% annual interest. Meanwhile, total U.S. credit card debt hit $1,160 billion in 2024, up to $1,280 billion by the end of 2025. And defaults, people who simply cannot pay, jumped 50% to over $46 billion in the first 9 months of 2024. The highest default rate since 2010. And remember, 60% of American adults were using credit cards to buy groceries in 2023. Not luxuries, not discretionary fun purchases, groceries, basic food, on a credit card, at 23% interest. The math on that is so painful that I genuinely don't want to do it out loud. But since we're here, if you put $500 of groceries on a credit card at 23% APR and pay only the minimum, that grocery bill will cost you substantially more than $500 before it's done. The sticker price of your food is not actually the price you're paying. Household debt overall hit $17.94 trillion in 2024. That includes mortgages, auto loans, student loans, and credit cards. That number is doing a lot of heavy lifting. That number represents millions of Americans managing monthly payment obligations that got significantly more expensive through higher interest rates, right at the same time that their purchasing power was being eroded by inflation. Both at once, double-decker, a two-story punch. And look, I don't want to be completely without hope here because I'm a naturally optimistic person who also knows how YouTube works. The Federal Reserve did start cutting rates in late 2024, and mortgage rates did ease somewhat. A 6.2 to 6.5% mortgage by late 2024 is meaningfully better than 7.79. The credit card rate situation is beginning, slowly, reluctantly, as if interest rates going down is personally embarrassing for these institutions, to ease. But we are a long way from where we were, and the damage of the rate hiking years is already baked in. The credit card debt is there. The locked-out home buyers are still renting. The people who tapped their savings to get through are still rebuilding. The emergency may be over. The cleanup is still very much in progress.